thought of her books, and she lifted up her voice also. At the first cry she succeeded. "Well, well," replied someone inside the house. "If it isn't Mrs. Wilcox come at last! Have you got the key, auntie?" "Madge, go away," said Miss Avery, still invisible. "Auntie, it's Mrs. Wilcox." Margaret supported her. "Your niece and I have come together." "Madge, go away. This is no moment for your hat." The poor woman went red. "Auntie gets more eccentric lately," she said nervously. "Miss Avery," called Margaret, "I have come about the furniture. Could you kindly let me in?" "Yes, Mrs. Wilcox," said the voice, "of course." But after that came silence. They called again without response. They walked round the house disconsolately. "I hope Miss Avery is not ill," hazarded Margaret. "Well, if you'll excuse me," said Madge, "perhaps I ought to be leaving you now. The servants need seeing to at the farm. Auntie is so odd at times." Gathering up her elegancies, she retired defeated, and, as if her departure had loosed a spring, the front door opened at once. Miss Avery said, "Well, come right in, Mrs. Wilcox," quite pleasantly and calmly. "Thank you so much," began Margaret, but broke off at the sight of an umbrella stand. It was her own. "Come right into the hall first," said Miss Avery. She drew the curtain, and Margaret uttered a cry of despair. For an appalling thing had happened. The hall was fitted up with the contents of the library from Wickham Place. The carpet had been laid, the big work table drawn up near the window, the bookcases filled the wall opposite the fireplace, and her father's sword, this is what bewildered her particularly, had been drawn from its scabbard, and hung naked amongst the sober volumes. Miss Avery must have worked for days. "I'm afraid this isn't what we meant," she began. "Mr. Wilcox and I never intended the cases to be touched. For instance, these books are my brother's. We are storing them for him and for my sister, who is abroad. When you kindly undertook to look after things, we never expected you to do so much." "The house has been empty long enough," said the old woman. Margaret refused to argue. "I dare say we didn't explain," she said civilly. "It has been a mistake, and very likely our mistake." "Mrs. Wilcox, it has been mistake upon mistake for 50 years. The house is Mrs. Wilcox's, and she would not desire it to stand empty any longer." "To help the poor decaying brain," Margaret said. "Yes, Mrs. Wilcox's house, the mother of Mr. Charles." "Mistake upon mistake," said Miss Avery. "Mistake upon mistake." "Well, I don't know," said Margaret, sitting down in one of her own chairs. "I really don't know what's to be done." She could not help laughing. The other said, "Yes, it should be a merry house enough." "I don't know, I dare say. Well, thank you very much, Miss Avery. Yes, that's all right. Delightful." "There is still the parlour." She went through the door opposite and drew a curtain. Light flooded the drawing room, and the drawing room furniture from Wickham Place, and the dining room. More curtains were drawn, more windows were flung open to the spring. "Then through here," Miss Avery continued, passing and repassing through the hall. Her voice was lost, but Margaret heard her pulling up the kitchen blind. "I've not finished here yet," she announced, returning. "There's still a deal to do. The farm lads will carry your great wardrobes upstairs, for there is no need to go into expense at Hilton." "It is all a mistake," repeated Margaret, feeling that she must put her foot down. "A misunderstanding. Mr. Wilcox and I are not going to live at Howards End." "Oh, indeed, on account of his hay fever?" We have settled to build a new home for ourselves in Sussex, and part of this furniture, my part, will go down there presently." She looked at Miss Avery intently, trying to understand the kink in her brain. Here was no maundering old woman. Her wrinkles were shrewd and humorous. She looked capable of scathing wit, and also of high but unostentatious nobility. "You think that you won't come back to live here, Mrs. Wilcox, but you will." "That remains to be seen," said Margaret, smiling. "We have no intention of doing so for the present. We happen to need a much larger house. Circumstances oblige us to give big parties. Of course, some day, one never knows, does one?" Miss Avery retorted. "Some day! Tut, tut! Don't talk about some day. You are living here now." "Am I?" "You are living here, and have been for the last 10 minutes, if you ask me." It was a senseless remark, but with a queer feeling of disloyalty Margaret rose from her chair. She felt that Henry had been obscurely censored. They went into the dining room, where the sunlight poured in upon her mother's chiffonier, and upstairs, where many an old god peeped from a new niche. The furniture fitted extraordinarily well. In the central room over the hall, the room that Helen had slept in 4 years ago, Miss Avery had placed Tibby's old bassinet. "The nursery," she said. Margaret turned away without speaking. At last everything was seen. The kitchen and lobby were still stacked with furniture and straw, but, as far as she could make out, nothing had been broken or scratched. A pathetic display of ingenuity. Then they took a friendly stroll in the garden. It had gone wild since her last visit. The gravel sweep was weedy, and grass had sprung up at the very jaws of the garage, and Evie's rockery was only bumps. Perhaps Evie was responsible for Miss Avery's oddness, but Margaret suspected that the cause lay deeper, and that the girl's silly letter had but loosed the irritation of years. "It's a beautiful meadow," she remarked. It was one of those open-air drawing-rooms that have been formed, hundreds of years ago, out of the smaller fields. So the boundary hedge zigzagged down the hill at right angles, and at the bottom there was a little green annex, a sort of powder closet for the cows. "Yes, the maid is well enough," said Miss Avery, "for those that is, who don't suffer from sneezing," and she cackled maliciously. "I've seen Charlie Wilcox go out to my lads in haytime. Oh, they ought to do this, they mustn't do that. He'd learn them to be lads." And just then the tickling took him. He has it from his father, with other things. There's not one Wilcox that can stand up against a field in June. I laughed fit to burst while he was courting Ruth. "My brother gets hay fever too," said Margaret. "This house lies too much on the land for them." Naturally, they were glad enough to slip in at first, but Wilcoxes are better than nothing, as I see you found. Margaret laughed. "They keep a place going, don't they?" "Yes, it is just that." "They keep England going, it is my opinion." But Miss Avery upset her by replying, "Ah, they breed like rabbits. Well, well, it's a funny world, but he who made it knows what he wants in it, I suppose. If Mrs. Charlie is expecting her fourth, it isn't for us to repine." "They breed and they also work," said Margaret, conscious of some invitation to disloyalty, which was echoed by the very breeze and by the songs of the birds. "It certainly is a funny world, but so long as men like my husband and his sons govern it, I think it'll never be a bad one, never really bad." "No, better'n nothing," said Miss Avery, and turned to the wych elm. On their way back to the farm, She spoke of her old friend much more clearly.